I'll call the study session for September 8th of the Newport Beach City Council to order. May we have the roll call, please?
The record will reflect that Councilmember Rosansky has an excused absence. Everyone else is present.
Okay. First item is clarification of items on the consent calendar. Councilwoman Daigle?
Yes, just kind of a heads up, I'm going to ask you to pull, I think it's 14, that's the one on the improvements on San Miguel and Avocado, and I don't have issues with the improvements, but I think given the level of interest by citizens as to traffic flow in that area, I think it'd be good to share with them what the city plans on doing up there. So, thank you.
Okay. Councilwoman Gardner?
I have three. Number four. On the second page of the ordinance, number 4, I thought, and I wasn't here for our study session on this, but I thought that the intent is to be sure that there's space between every canopy. But the way this reads, it talks about groups of shade coverings, and to me that implies that, once again, we will have them hooked together and creating these islands of canopies. And unfortunately, I don't see the city attorney here to clarify the language. But so perhaps this. Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking for David, and there you are. So, does this still let you put together awnings, or does it mean that we have to have a 5-foot separation between every one?
My understanding is that it is designed to ensure again that they do not create these islands that block the view from other beachgoers, and so connecting them would be the objective. I mean, one of the objectives that the ordinance seeks to prevent.
Okay, so we are preventing that with this ordinance.
That's right.
All right. And number 5.
Excuse me, Nancy. The way I understood that, as long as you could have them put together, as long as it didn't exceed 100 square feet of covered area, which may not be very practical, but I mean that's kind of the way I read it. You know. Is
right.
That reasonable?
I'm sorry, I don't have the ordinance language right in front of me. But, yeah, that's the objective is to prevent these large blocks of groups of tents and canopies together that create this obstruction. It doesn't prevent two people from putting a couple of pop-ups together as long as they don't exceed that ultimate area that creates these large blocks.
Okay, thank you.
But, Councilwoman, before we leave that one, we also had a discussion when you weren't here about, are we going to write a citation if it's 4.5 feet separation? Right. So it's really the reasonable thing. Can a person or two people walk between
Absolutely,
tents?
I understand that. Okay. Number 5, the film permit refers to individuals and for residences. I'm wondering why it would not also, if you had a film shoot on a commercial property, that could still have impacts on traffic and everything. And I wonder if that's not a legal question per se. That's more of just a clarification. Had that been considered? And I'm going to get an answer here. I can see.
Well, I think it does.
Councilman Gardner, yes, we did consider commercial filming operations on commercial property. The zoning code provides that commercial locations have to have a use permit that allow commercial filming. So there's already a zoning code preemption, if you will, for filming on commercial properties.
Thank you. And number 17. No, sorry, I'm wrong. 19. This is the one where we are changing the parking for one person, and it seems very awkward. And how often do we do this? I don't want to impose on the individual, but it does seem odd that you could have a block with two different parking structures, particularly if it were in the middle. I mean, if I'm in the middle of the block and I say I don't want to be part of this parking thing, can I do that?
I'm not sure how we treat if someone is in the middle, but I think this particular location is actually on the end.
Okay, so we're
so
there.
I think that was easier to do. If somebody wanted to opt out that was in the middle, I think we'd probably try to discourage that because it would be virtually impossible to enforce.
All right, so we don't feel like we're setting an uncomfortable precedent here. All right, thank you.
Councilman Webb?
I have none.
Councilman Henn?
Yeah, I too was interested in item number 14, Leslie, and in particular, when we do comment on that tonight, if you could sort of update us with regard to this once floated idea of a median, a separated median going through that intersection, you know, that blocked the ability to make a left turn on Avocado coming off. So if you could address that, thanks.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem Curry.
No additional items?
Okay, and I have none. So we'll move on to the items at hand. The first one is the presentation on the synthetic turf.
Mr. Mayor, my role during this study session is going to try and make sure the council moves along expeditiously. We have 4 important items to cover. We want to get into closed session at 5. So I may be just kind of, you know, pushing and trying to make sure.
Being
that we
pushed
get
in your
there.
last meeting, huh?
Managing the study session. That's right. Yep, that would be 6 months severance. And I'm all for it.
Boy, he's tried everything.
Dave?
Should we start with good evening, thank you, any questions? Actually, good evening, Council and Mayor. We did want to get back to you. This was an item we brought to the CIP last year where you wanted us to study synthetic turf a little deeper and look at the various fields and options for the city. We had budgeted about $200,000 last year, as you remember. With that, staff has gone out and hired CMX sports engineers, and with us tonight is James Perryman. He's the principal in that firm. With that, we did a study on the turf. He'll be talking about that a little bit. We took this to PB&R on the August 4th agenda and had a discussion there as a receive and file, and they had a few questions. So with that, I'd like to kind of open it up and bring James up and let him go through this presentation.
Thank you, and thank you all for having us here. We were very excited about the study, and we think we'll be able to help you move forward in this type of a project. I've got a little presentation. I'll do everything I can to speed it up. If we could maybe... talk a little bit about who we are just very shortly, what our project approach was to producing this report, talk about the actual study itself, the conclusions, and then end up if there are any questions at the end. We are a full-service civil engineering design firm. Based upon our love of sports, we've been involved in athletic type projects for the last 23 years. Involved in several types. You can see one of our fields there, the Arizona Cardinals rollout field was one of the fields that we were involved with. We had many other projects throughout the United States, and we're now working overseas on some projects too. So we like to represent ourselves as understanding sports and sports fields, both natural and artificial. So we don't really bring any axe to grind one way or the other. We'd be more than happy to design any kind of a field that you folks would like. The actual project approach started with information gathering. We got the interested stakeholders from the city together, representatives of the parks departments and the maintenance departments. It's not maintenance, it's, pardon me? General services. And we went through a series of questions and discussions about what we were looking for and what they were looking for and what kind of interest, the things that we would be asking about. We followed that up with a couple of site visits, documented exactly what you've got out there on the fields that we were asked to study, produced a rough draft, which was then combed through quite well by your staff. I must admit that every step along the way, I've been very impressed with the people that you have working here and the product that you have out there in the fields. And the reviews and the comments were then incorporated into the final report, which I believe you've all been given a copy of. In addition, we produced a little executive summary report. We're going to go through a little bit of that today. I want to talk a little bit about the existing conditions. That was the place we almost always start. What have you got, and where do you want to do to improve that? We talked about the maintenance practices that are currently ongoing. Synthetic turf is a product, while it requires minimum maintenance, it does require maintenance of some type. So it's always good to find out what type of maintenance you're currently doing on the fields that you have. The amenities that you have available at each particular park were very important. What do you have? What would it be that the good things that you have at the parks which would be enhanced by having a synthetic turf field there? And then the programming. What programming is currently offered through the Parks and Recs departments? We created a list of selection criteria that we wanted to take a look at, and then use that to come up with a ranking matrix later on. And these are some of the areas that we looked at. We looked at several others, but these were kind of the most critical: the construction costs, the available parking, current programming being offered, and can we enhance that, the annual maintenance costs that it's taking currently for Newport Beach to maintain the facilities that you've got, what kind of utilities and infrastructure is available at each park site, and then how many users and really what would be the cost per user. So based upon that, we kind of went back and produced the whole 16, I believe, proposed field layouts, went through those with the staff to get it just the way that they wanted them. And you can see from this one that we had a couple of options. At Lincoln Athletic Center, the bottom field is outlined in the dotted red line, and then the upper field was a solid red line. And we used that. The dotted red lines on all of the fields that are in the report would be the preferred first option that the staff wanted us to look at. And then, again, we expanded the study to say, well, what if we had available monies, what else could we do at each one of the parks? So that would be the solid fields. We even took a look at a couple of parks that were either just being built, just being finished, or in the process of being designed, and walked through the exercise with them also. This is another one of Bonita Creek Park, again, where you can see the soccer football field at the bottom is in the dotted line, and then as monies would be available, we would include the outfield and even the infields in some of them, for some of the layouts. Those then generated the engineer's estimates of probable costs, of which we went through several items that are included in the report. I don't need to go through each and every one of them, but I did want to put up here a little bit of a recap alphabetically of the costs that we are looking at, the city would be looking at to convert from a natural grass to a synthetic turf field at each one of the different parks. And you can see, like Bob Henry has the Henry Park, and then the bid alternate would include doing just a smaller portion in the outfields. Bob Henry has two ball fields, a softball and baseball field, that kind of back up to each other, and we could put synthetic turf in the outfield. That's what the bid alternate would be, a smaller piece of grass or synthetic turf. And you can see they range from a low of $459,000 to just do a little inset at Mariners Park up to $1.9 million for Bonita Creek. That would have been that previous, to do the entire, that whole area in red was the $1.9 million. From that, we produced the ranking matrix that included 7 different categories that the staff felt were the most critical. The first being the development costs, and we gave points in each one of the categories. We set up a little a scoring system so that each individual park could attain points equal to or better than others. We felt that if you just ranked them the top to the bottom and started assigning points that way, that wasn't the fairest way. By setting up categories, and then within the categories creating points within it, we felt that the best possible field would have to really extend beyond the others. It would have to be something special about that field for it to lead the field if several fields could get the same points in each category. So we took a look at it that way, tried to be as objective as possible, and we came up with the 7 categories: the costs, the organized sports that are currently being offered at the fields, the utilities, and that kind of boiled down to whether the fields have lights or not, the parking, available parking, the annual maintenance that is being spent and could be saved by switching from natural grass fields to a synthetic field, the increase in participants because of all the downtime that the natural grass fields are currently undergoing, and then the cost per participant. And at the end of that, assigning points, as you can see, several of them in every category got the same points. But Bonita Creek, the football soccer rendition, or that particular layout, received the highest points. Both Bonita Creek parks were 7 to 8 points above any of the other parks that we looked at. So we felt as though that worked very well to identify the park that would really benefit the most. Talk just a little bit at the Parks, Beaches, and Recreation Commission hearing. Several questions were asked. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the benefits of the synthetic turf if you're not that familiar with them. The first one is the consistency and the playability. Compared to a natural grass turf field, which through irrigation, rain, et cetera, gets a little lumpy at times, the consistency and the playability of these fields is almost unparalleled. We have them designed and constructed so that they are flat, no greater dip than 1/4 of an inch in any 10-foot area. So these fields are very, very consistent, playable across the entire surface of the field. So you're not going to get funny bounces anywhere on these fields. They're safer than natural grass fields. You can control the G-max, which I'm sure you're familiar with, being involved with cities and parks, and et cetera. The amount of cushioning that a field offers. These fields run somewhere between 90 and 120 G-max, whereas 160 is unsafe and 200 is just a lawsuit waiting to happen. So these fields are very easy to control the G-max rating on the field. So we feel that they're much safer, and they're not. They don't give you the rug burns. The new materials don't give rug burns or anything like that anymore. So they're much safer than the older fields.
Excuse me, what's G-max?
G-max is a rating of how soft a field is, would be the best way I can do it. A G-max over 200 would be like asphalt.
Okay.
Sand would probably be, if it was, regular beach sand, not compacted sand, would be in the 70s to 80s. So it's a measure that's used in the industry as to what type of surfaces below playgrounds or on athletic fields.
And just one other quick question. I had a chance to actually be on the new synthetic field at Estancia High School, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago, which was a beautiful installation. Are we talking about the kind of turf here that was installed at Estancia High School?
Yes, it's the new infill artificial turf fields that have
real little rubber pellet ties.
Yes, recycled. A lot of them are recycled tires, but there are other products out there that are infills. The increased usage, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but these fields don't require a ton of maintenance, and the maintenance usually takes 3 to 4 hours once every 3 to 4 or 5 months is all it would take to maintain the fields.
Related to what you said, so that this won't look like grass. This will look more like the playground, the material that's around playground equipment?
No, it looks exactly like grass. It's designed for little green grass tufts, and then you infill it with sand and rubber mixtures. So you have tufts that stick up that look like growing grass, but then the actual surface that you're playing on, landing on, running on, et cetera, is a combination of about 2 inches of sand and rubber mixture. But it does have a grass look about it.
That field at Estancia, I mean, you almost have to stand on it and reach down and touch it to really understand that it's not grass. It looks just like grass, perfectly manicured grass.
You can also have water savings. I think we calculated that the football soccer field at Bonita Creek, if it is changed to synthetic turf, would save about 1.2 million gallons of water a year. And then labor savings. Just again, instead of mowing the grass, edging it every week, you're talking about once every 3 to 4 months, you'll have somebody out running a grooming machine across it, which will kind of level it back up a little bit and then stand the tufts up, kind of like you used to have to do with shag carpet. You'd have to fluff it up a little bit every now and then.
Is that a small machine, a big machine? Are we talking millions of dollars to buy one, or?
No, the machine is less than $1,000, and generally speaking, as you move through the process beyond this, if you hire an engineer like us to design the field, we always include a purchase of the 2 to 3 pieces of maintenance equipment with the field. So the groomers are less than $1,000, and we have like leaf catchers to clean up surface debris, and they're, again, less than $1,000. So those are almost always included in the purchase, and you just tow them behind whatever equipment you currently have.
I thought the proposal was that the Parks and Senior Services Department would actually do the maintenance as opposed to General Services. Is that the way it's being looked at?
Yes.
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 Okay.
I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the environmental issues that you may have heard about that are out in the general public about synthetic turf. The first one is the heat. Yes, the fields are hotter than natural grass. It is totally related to sunshine on the fields, and they can be anywhere from 30 to 40 to 50 degrees hotter than a natural grass field next to them. But most of that heat is low heat, so the latest studies are looking to see if that kind of heat at the lower level will, if there's any kind of a way to determine that, if it increases the amount of injuries to feet and lower legs.
Did you say 30 degrees?
30 to 60 degrees hotter than a field. When the sun is shining on it, as soon as the sun goes away from shining on it, or if the ambient temperatures are less, then the fields are not as hot. But it's usually direct sunlight in the middle of the summers when you have the most extreme conditions.
Well, does that suggest that a field at 60 degrees on a typical sunny day, that a synthetic field would be 110 degrees?
Could be 90 to 110, yeah, depending upon the amount of direct sunlight on it. Yes. So there are many attempts being made to change the product, to change the infill, to go from the black recycled infill, recycled rubbers, to different colored infills, different materials for the infill, which will absorb less heat and hold less heat. So there are studies going on about that now. The other thing to do would be to syringe the fields, throw a little bit of water on it, and let the evaporative cooling effect reduce the temperature. And there are ways to include syringing systems which are being modified, being created by the irrigation companies, so that you can put a little bit of water on a field. You're not trying to grow anything. You're just trying to get some water out there, which drops the temperature down for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, and then you'd have to do it again on hot days. So that's kind of the heat issue. Toxicity, you may have heard recently that maybe some of these fields have lead in them, and that maybe this could cause injuries or illnesses in children. None of the products that are in this generation of synthetic turf fields, which is the infill type with the polyethylene, polypropylene blades, have lead in them. And so there's none in these fields. Some of the old AstroTurf brand products were made with lead to make the color last a little bit longer. But even on those fields, they have done study after study and have not found any way for that material to find its way into a person's body. So studies have been done last summer, several studies in New York and New Jersey, and they've basically, both of those states have said the fields are totally acceptable as being built today, so there's no reason whatsoever not to have these synthetic turf fields out there. So they're both of those states are going forward with many of the synthetic turf fields. And the last one is MRSA. You may have heard about the staph infections, the possibility that maybe these fields would be a breeding environment for the Staphylococcus bacteria. Athletic fields and athletic facilities do harbor some of those, but generally speaking, you're talking about a dark, moist climate. Most of these fields are outdoors, so you've got vast variations in temperature between day and night, and that really reduces any chance of anyone contracting the staph infections from athletic fields, these synthetic turf fields. They have been producing this type of a synthetic turf field for about 10 or 11 years. There's never been one single case documented where an athlete caught any staph infection from the athletic field. You might find it in a locker room. You might find it because they rub up against each other and have open sores. You might find it on equipment that they use, but they've never found any that has been traced back to any fields. So that's a little bit of the history about the turf and the turf study. We've taken a look at it. We would love to move forward. I hope that you would look moving forward. We think that some of the conclusions that we really thought were important were the fact that The water savings is tremendous, 1.2 million gallons on just one field. If you were to take a look over several years of doing all the fields in the study, at some point, the amount of water saved alone would be tremendous. And the Bonita Creek Park really stood out among all the fields that we looked at as being one of the best. Would be able to save you the most money, would be to be able to increase the number of users every year out there, somewhere around 49% over what it's been the number of users in the past, just based on the availability. So that would be the field that we would recommend that you begin with, the Bonita Creek football soccer field. And now I'd open it up to any additional questions.
Longevity? How long does this stuff
The
last?
fields are warranted for 8 years with normal use and maintenance. And at that point, you would be replacing just the turf itself, like the carpet, so you wouldn't have to build a new floor and a new drainage system or anything else underneath it. You would be just pulling off the carpet and putting a new piece down.
And so that is what, 50% of the original cost or 70%?
About
I mean,
60,
obviously,
yeah.
prices increase, but about, I'm sorry, what did you say?
About 60%.
And the color? I know there was fading before, and is that getting better?
Yes, there are several colors available, greens, several green colors available, and then just about a half a dozen other colors at no additional cost. I'm sure you're familiar with the Boise State Blue Field. That's an infill artificial turf, synthetic turf field with blue blades of grass. You can have about any color that you'd like. I've never seen a pink one yet, but I don't know if
Oh,
you
but the
want
girls'
pink.
soccer would love that.
Soccer would love that, but I'm sure it could be done.
Okay, Councilman Head?
Yeah, a couple quick questions. Of course, you've equally weighted all of these ratings categories. There might be a tendency to say, well, let's go for the biggest bang for the buck, you know, the lowest cost per increased participant or something like that. Did you discuss weighting these rating categories, or did you just kind of roll along?
Well, when you say we equally weighted them, I mean, like for the lights, you either got 6 points or 0.
Right, but each ratings category was a maximum of 6 points. And
Well, 5, 6, or 7. They varied between 5, 6, or 7.
Okay,
Based
all right.
upon, you know, the scale. We kind of took a look at it and said, what's the differential between them? How do they start to divide themselves, you know, 5,000 to 10,000 or $5 to $7? So we took a look at it and said, what are the kind of like divisions, the top and the bottom, and then how do we divide it equally between that, and then tried to offer a series of points. And we did talk about weighting. That's why you'll see that's why the lighting, the utilities ended up a 6 or a 0. It was felt very strongly that if you have lights, that's a huge plus.
I see.
So
Sort of
they got
inherent.
6 points instead of 0 and 1.
Okay.
So there was some weighting going on. We tried to take a look at what the staff felt were the key things, and that they would get the best bang for.
Yeah. Then I only had one other comment, and that has to do with Sunset Ridge Park, where you show the cost of improvements of $1,647,000. But really, that's a different category, isn't it?
It would have to be,
Because that
yes.
park hasn't been built yet.
That's correct.
And so, does this represent the incremental cost of turf over natural grass, or is this just the full cost of the turf installation?
It was priced exactly the same as the other, so it would have been if you would build the park now with natural grass,
Yeah.
and then several years from now want to convert it. We didn't
Yeah.
take a look at what the cost of that one would be
But you see,
to build it with that.
I think we ought to have a second category for Sunset Ridge that's based on incremental cost, and it's not going to change your ultimate recommendation here for the top-rated park, but it could move Sunset Ridge up in the rankings, and beyond that, since we haven't built it yet, you know, that for a small incremental cost, it might make a lot of sense to think about that. I'm not sure what the cost of natural grass at Sunset Ridge is, but $1 million? I don't know, to do the field. But in any event, I don't know, but I would like to see an additional alternative that just speaks to the incremental cost at
Okay.
Sunset Ridge.
Councilman Curry?
Do we have a specific staff recommendation on what we're being asked to do here?
No, this is a study session. The staff does agree that Bonita Creek Park is the ideal park to take this on if we want to do that. We don't have any money budgeted in our budget for artificial turf for a park, as I recall.
That's correct. Actually, we looked at that, and if we were to conclude something and you wanted to move ahead, we would suggest Bonita Creek Park. It's about $1.1 million to move forward with this, with the cost system they have, and also to build a small security fence around it. And that'd be something you want to consider in the next CIP or whenever. Just one comment, too, on Sunset Ridge. We did look at that, Councilmember Henn, during the process of designing that park. We're still looking at that now, but the number that comes to mind, maybe Mike you can remind me, it was about $600,000 difference. That one, we'd save on excavation some other things that we wouldn't do up front and be able to put the turf in. The downside of that one is there's no lights, so you'd get less play at night. We weren't going to light that park, but it was a consideration. We can look at that further if you like.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, is there any direction you want from us today?
I don't think so. And the council didn't get copies of the full report, as I recall. I think we just provided you summary. So anybody interested in looking at the full report, that certainly is available to you. And my recommendation would not to be take any action on it right now. And I think maybe wait a couple of months and see how the financial picture looks. $1 million for another project at this point in time is certainly a big amount. So for what it's worth, that would be my recommendation.
Okay.
But again, Sunset Ridge is one that probably also ought to stay on the burner here for consideration, since we started just organizing the building.
That's a different situation, right? Since we know we're going to move forward with building that park. I would agree.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next item is the review of the memorandum of agreement regarding the Orange Coast River Park.
We have our own city council member.
Oh, is she on staff now?
Well, Sharon's
I know
not
she
here.
got demoted, but yes, we are claiming her.
Sharon's riding her bike through France and eating wonderful food. So I think this is very straightforward in what we're looking for. You're all familiar with Orange Coast River Park, and it's come a long way in both its structure and the aspects of it. But we do need direction. We did a vision plan, as did the two other cities that are part of the park. And one of the recommendations is that we combine them, so we have one vision for this end of the river and better coordinate them. And if the council is agreeable to that, we need direction as to whether it should be a staff-directed or a council-directed project. As you probably know, I've been sitting on the Orange Coast River Park Steering Committee since, well, early on. So I'm familiar with it. I'm certainly willing to continue to work there. But Sharon seemed to think that staff could put it together in 2 hours, where it would take council people months. So that's a question. I should also point out that the other cities are going to be asking these same questions, but they have not yet. So what we do will probably set the template for what the other cities do. The other part of it is to also give direction as to the memorandum of agreement. We signed this several years ago, and the reason that the steering committee, the Orange Coast River Park Steering Committee, wanted this agreement was because it would be helpful to have some kind of governing structure for the park, and it's been hard because we can't get the county signature. So our thought was, we're not quite sure why the county won't sign on to it, but they still participate. And that if we went ahead and had the three cities agree to start proceeding while inviting the county to participate in any way it wanted to, we could come forward with a recommendation for a structure of management. And you have a letter in front of you from the Newport Banning Ranch partners, and that's certainly agreeable. I think it speaks to the need for a more formal management system, because a group like the Banning Ranch partners could be a part of that, and as owners of property that is involved in the river park. So we'd just like some guidance from the council as to how you see us proceeding.
I can give you some feedback, if that's okay. I went to the meeting, that you were at and spoke at, and I think some direction to consider would be to have a staff-led discussion. And then secondly, in terms of the people at the table, let's include the county. You know, we don't want to forget about the county. I think that would be important. And then I also discussed with Gene Watt, you know, some of those ideas too. And I think he'd probably have talked to Gene as well. So that would be some of the. Oh, there's Gene there. So that would be, I guess, some of the direction that for consideration.
Well, I think, simply stated, the Orange County River Park is one of the most important things that we're going to be focusing on, and I think it deserves, Nancy, as high a level of attention as you believe warrants at this particular point in time, and I'm pleased for your involvement in it. And as a member of the Orange County Parks Commission, I'll be happy to raise the issue with the county as to why they're not perhaps more involved in it, because I think they should be. I have no problem with getting as broad a representation as possible in an advisory role. And I think this needs to, you know, move up the priority chain in terms of what we're doing as a council to help make this park a reality.
I will continue to stay involved. My suggestion would be then that we ask staff to meet with the other staffs, at least as a preliminary, and come back with a proposal as far as the visioning plans, as a way they see to proceed, to the council, and then we can move on from there.
Would that also include a recommendation to invite the Banning Ranch people to sit in at the table? Because I think it really is they're an important party in this.
Yes, and we're delighted to see that they do want to be a part of it, because I think initially there may have been some resistance on either one side or the other, but there certainly isn't today.
Okay. Just to make it clear, how much of this park is owned by the county?
About 25%, 20%? Right, and then the Huntington Wetlands Conservancy, they own about 200 acres themselves.
They own about 200 acres, and that will grow, and then there's 92 acres of Corps of Engineers property.
And they have been to a few of the meetings.
Okay, so it is important for the county to be a part of this, just by virtue of their ownership of the.
Yes, and that's why, as I say, they come, one of their staff members does come to the meetings. We just haven't been able, for some reason, to have them sign on to the agreement at this point.
And Nancy, do you intend to stay active on the governing board then?
Yes, I'll continue to go to the meetings. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And I came in way under my time.
And under budget, too.
We'll put it in your bank. Okay, does anyone from the public want to comment on this item? Step forward. No? Okay. All right, well, does anyone on the council have any objection to Councilman Gardner's recommendation? Okay, I think you got your direction on that one. We came in without you having to wrap our knuckles in the time. You know, one thing, just to keep the record straight, because I forgot to do it, does anyone want to comment on the synthetic turf out there? Okay, I didn't think so. All right, the next item is the pavement management program update.
Thank you. Wanted to bring this to you tonight. This is one of several master plans that we've come embarked to oversee and redo and make sure we're up to par on this. The pavement management plan is a very key component in our CIP process. It lets us forecast and predict where we need to do our paving efforts. It tells us kind of budgetary constraints and also answers questions about where and when. Our last pavement management plan was done in 1997, so we're due for an update. Tonight I want to introduce two key people to you. Andy Tran, who's sitting down in front here, he's our senior engineer. You may or may not have met Andy. He works on our pavement side and is becoming quite the guru in that, so I'm kind of mentoring up there, and he'll be presenting tonight. Also, Peter Bucknam is back with us tonight. He's our consultant with Bucknam & Associates, who actually did the update. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy, and you can go through the plan.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of Council. My name is Andy Trent with the Public Works Department. Tonight, or this afternoon actually, I was hoping to provide everyone with a brief overview of our pavement management program. I'm going to touch on the several different types of pavement that we do have in the city and go over some of the factors that might affect pavement life. And then I'm going to turn this over to Peter Bucknam, who will talk a little more about our pavement management program in greater details. Okay, our city street pavement was developed between the early 1900s and today. We are still regularly today rehabbing and rehabilitating a lot of our streets because pavement tends to continuously deteriorate. We have 3 types of pavement in varying conditions. The first being Portland cement concrete, which is also known as PCC, which can be found on primarily Balboa Island, Balboa Peninsula, and most of our alleys. Secondly, we also have asphalt concrete, or AC, which makes up the majority of our pavement type. I think a little over 90% of all our streets are asphalt concrete streets. And thirdly, we also have a little bit of pavers, which can be found on East Oceanfront Alley down in Peninsula Point, and also Via Porta, which is right outside City Hall. Okay, there are many factors that can actually affect pavement life. The first and foremost being the traffic volume and loads, as you can see down the bottom left there with the 18-wheeler there. Because of this traffic loading, we have different pavement, structural pavement sections actually for arterials versus the residential streets. Being down in Southern California, we're actually fortunate to not have any severe weather conditions, although the limited rain and sometimes irrigation runoff do tend to wash away a lot of the oil that's in the asphalt, causing the asphalts to deteriorate a little more rapidly. Pavement type and age, I covered the pavement types. We primarily have concrete and asphalt. Concrete having a much longer design life than asphalt does. Also, the soil and base material underneath your pavement itself, being a coastal city, we a lot of times encounter sand, which kind of lends itself to more PCC pavement along the coast. And lastly, the availability of funding also plays a large role in, as a factor actually, it plays a large role as a factor in affecting our pavement life. So why do we need a tool? We need a pavement management system in place so that we can answer some of the following questions. What do we have today? What are we dealing with? Being a 100-year-old city, 100-year-old plus city, a lot of our streets have already been overlaid, slurried, or even reconstructed, such as Kings Road currently, right now. How fast is it deteriorating? Our pavement management software, which Peter will go into, there's actually a built-in deterioration curve that we can factor in so that we can kind of predict what's going to happen 5 to 10 years down the line. And also, it helps us answer when do we need to repair a certain street. A lot of times you'll see us let a street go a little beyond a slurry seal because we feel that it's already beyond the slurry seal or the preventative maintenance, so we actually let it go a little further along so we can potentially overlay the street instead of instead of a slurry seal. And it also helps us with where we want to focus on. And lastly, it helps us answer how much will it cost. So every year when we do our CIP budgeting, we can have the proper appropriations for each of the projects. And lastly, any what-ifs that pop up that we might not have an answer to today, it also is a tool for us to answer those questions. And at this time, I would like to bring up Peter Bucknam to go over the rest of them.
Go back to that previous slide there when I began. Before that, I want to thank you for the privilege of speaking in front of you, Honorable Mayor and council members. Working for Newport Beach is a little bit of a passion of mine. My father worked here in the 70s from 1970 to 1979 within the Public Works Department, so coming full circle here today is, again, once a privilege. I've been working with pavement management systems for over 12 years in Orange County alone. I've worked with over half of the cities in this county in the public works and general services and maintenance yards. So I bring quite a bit of experience in regards to what your benchmark cities are doing, as well as the applications that are being applied there. But when it comes to your city, that experience brings a fresh outlook to the city. And since the last updates was 1997, which I was a small part of, I was kind of the follow-up project manager of that when I got into this business. 10 years later or plus, here we are. So the big thing with me and the biggest passion that I have with pavement management systems is that last question is, what if? It comes from council members, the mayors, public works directors, city engineer types, where what if our funding is cut in half?
What if the federal stimulus package doesn't trickle down from the state? What if Prop 42 isn't funded, 1Bs, and all these factors that public works staff is constantly having to monitor. That really plays a big part in regards to the pavement management program, because this is a planning tool, not so much a design tool, but a planning tool that allows your public works staff to forecast really what is needed to be done on the network. So a typical pavement management system looks like this. You have 6 to 7 major tasks, just like if you were to assess your facilities for how often you need to paint or re-roof. It's the same type of analogy when it comes to pavement management systems as the scope that you see in front of here. And this is basically the scope that we provided for the city. You need to assess, you need to update any type of software or record-keeping system that's in place. You need to do condition assessments on your infrastructure. Obviously here it's arterials and collectors and your residentials and alley networks. You need to assess what is currently being done by public works staff, what applications are using, what they're using, when they're using that, why they're using it, and the cost benefit of that application. So that's development rehab, to develop rehabilitation strategies and life cycle process. That's what we look into and did for your city here. And then we forecast your maintenance based on available funding. And we'll get into this in detail on a few other slides, so bear with me on that. And what we looked at here for your arterial and collector network, as well as your residential network, is a 7-year capital outlay of the assets that you have over the, roughly, I think it's over 35 million square feet of asphalt that you have in PCC. Okay, so major goals: assess existing database in the pavement management segmentation. Obviously, the system has been was last updated by an outside party in 1997, and it has been monitored and managed through public works staff since then. We adopted the segmentation, and I believe it was about this time last year. Most of the major work on this project was done in the fall, winter of '08 and the spring of this year. So the first thing we looked at was the pavement segmentation to make sure it was following what is called the Army Corps of Engineers standard segmentation policies that are in there. And I'll get into that when I talk about micropaver, which is your software. Performed pavement condition surveys across the entire network. Not one street was missed, so we looked at every street to make sure that it existed in the system for one. Any new streets that needed to be added were put into place. Private streets were looked at heavily to make sure they weren't accounted for. So down to the nitty-gritty on that type of assessment. Then we developed the rank and street conditions, maintenance recommendations, and cost estimates for the city. Developed, again, that 7-year CIP street maintenance and rehab schedule. Across, again, the arterials, any residential zones and maintenance practices there. And then we submitted the final report to the OCTA for Measure M compliance, which is a key factor for each Orange County agency. Every other year, you have to submit a final report to the OCTA to be eligible for your Measure M turnback monies, which plays a huge factor on the arterial and collector network. Micropaver, a little bit brief history on micropaver. It's used by over 600 cities nationally, 200 in the state, mostly within LA, Central Valley, and Orange County and San Diego counties, as well as the IE cities. Over probably those numbers that you see there, the 23 for LA and the 22 are about 1 or 2 year old numbers. The one with Orange County, I was personally the project manager working with OCTA last year, where I assisted OCTA in selecting micropaver as a county-wide pavement management software. I'm not sure if you're up to date with that project. I can answer questions about that later. But OCTA is now requiring every local agency, which is 35 agencies, counting the county, to use micropaver within the next year, and then to be completely compliant within Measure M2. Micropaver allows for the evaluation of quite a few types of distresses. When the actual technicians go out and look at the distresses that are found on the street, there's 19 AC distresses and 19 PCC, which carry 3 levels of severity. Low severity, like a minor crack they can barely see by looking at the street, unless you're right on top of it, to a large pothole or an alligator below out to that level. So the system is pretty inherent when it comes to capturing a lot of data. And the biggest thing with micropaver is that the only pavement management system in the nation that has a standard rating of inspection. And we'll talk about that on the next slide with pavement condition index. It's based on the ASTM standard for asphalt inspections. No other software on the market has that eligibility or compatibility. A pavement condition index is the PCI. You might see other acronyms like PQI or OCI from other agencies you've been involved with or other systems you've seen through other vendors. Pavement condition index is a rating from 0 to 100, where 0 is a termed failed street, although it's still drivable. It's not the greatest term in the world. To excellent, which is a brand new street, freshly put in as a new tract of homes, or recently overlaid or reconstructed. Three factors that go into the calculation of the PCI, the three major ones, are distress type. Obviously, you have alligator cracking, slippage cracking, rutting, various types of distresses. The quantity or the extent of that distress, be it a square footage or a linear foot, and its severity, again, that low, medium, or high severity. So Micropaper will take in that information, look at the size of the segment that's been sampled for the survey, and then come up with a rating number, such as like in Findlay out here in front of the City Hall might be, I didn't look at it in detail in the report for this afternoon, but something to the level of a condition of a 60. That's the type of number that would come out of it.
Can I ask you a question? How long after a new street is put in do you think it would retain the excellent category?
Good question. I'll be showing you a deterioration slide. It's not the scale, but typical new overlay or brand new street, if you model within Micropaper or most softwares, no maintenance for 10 years, that section will hold its condition to about 87 over a 10-year period. Usually that's when agency or public works staff starts looking at a slurry seal type of maintenance, a pavement rejuvenator to seal the street and so forth, and go about that. I believe these pictures are from Newport. Yes. They're pretty close up, so you can't really see which streets, but it's a good example of what an excellent street or a very good street would look like. A brand new overlay. There's extremely minimal distress. Only distresses are picked up on a section like this, or any type of structural defects like bumps or sags, or any kind of minor linear cracking. So as a staff, when they see a large majority of sections, pavement sections themselves, let's say First Street from Main to Euclid or something like that, the staff would consider this street to be a preventative maintenance type of street or a stopgap, where you'd have to come in and do a small patch within the first 10 years or a small amount of crack sealing. As this pavement deteriorates, this is a good example. I don't know if you can really see the contrast. It's great on the laptop, but this is a good example of a slurry seal wearing off. This slurry seal is probably about 4 or 5 years old. I didn't even know where the picture came from, but just by looking at it, I can see the slurry starting to wear off. The age of the older asphalt that was underneath, the lighter gray, is starting to show through. So this would be a potential candidate, probably within anywhere between a year to 3 years, for either a new slurry, as long as most of the slurry is worn off, or a candidate for a thin overlay or something to that level as the section deteriorates below 55. As a section deteriorates, you get into a level of major type of overlays. They're termed mill and caps or grind and overlays, where you might grind off 6 feet off the gutter line or grind off across the entire width of the section. The staff will go down an inch or two, depending on the structural integrity and the money that's available. Obviously, it always comes down to money, and come in with a new asphalt, 2 inches of asphalt, let's say. So a candidate of a PCI between 30 and 55 fits this type of mold, where severities, again, that key component of PCI, you're getting into medium severity and high severities. Now, most cities in Orange County have a very minimal amount of these. There's a few cities out there that do have these, not so much Newport Beach. But you might have small sections of your streets that are out there. I believe it's a graph or table we're going to show you about 6% of the network that you have.
That's a Costa Mesa street, right?
It is a Costa Mesa street. I believe it was, just over the limit there. But this is a great candidate in regards to if this was an extended across a 50,000 square foot section, and a large majority, let's say 70% of the section looked like this. Obviously, the cost to repair this is extremely high compared to a slurry seal, and we'll talk about that in a second. But this is a great example of what that PCI is looking or kind of generating when it looks at that, anything between a 0 and a 30. Sometimes you get that question, what's the difference between a 5 and an 8? Not much. It's just the amount of distress that's out there. So looking at your network as a summary real quick, the City of Newport Beach, our collector network rounded up, has about 18 million square feet of AC pavement, I believe. I think it includes AC and PCC in that number. Residential is 28 million square feet, so a pretty large network. That's very, it's a unique layout compared to other coastal cities as well as North Orange County cities. The weighted average PCI, that 0 to 100 scale, you're at an 82 for your arterials, which is very good. That's a great number to be at, and we'll talk about a preventative maintenance approach based on that number that we found. And then your residential is coming in at a 72 weighted PCI. And you ask yourself, well, how do we compare, or where does that fall? That's a little above average, just slightly above average. Overall, the citywide PCI is 76. For this size of a network, when you're dealing with 250 plus, 260 plus miles of streets, to be at a level of 76 is a good reflection that Public Works and General Services maintenance staff have been on the ball in regards to being reactive, probably most of the time over the last 10 years. But now with a new plan in place, there can become even more proactive to increase that number. And we'll talk about that proactive goal here in a second. Real quickly, this is a summary breakdown of the mileage across the network. On the columns, we have arterial and collector and residential. Sub-column headings are AC and PC breakdowns. The numbers below those are the mileage that's included based on the range of PCI condition on the left side of the table. So if you spend a couple, maybe 2 or 3 minutes looking at a table like this, you really start getting a good feeling of how the network condition currently resides. You look at the right side of the table, the sections, and then the high amount of mileage between excellent and very good is 75% of your network. So if I was to come off the street this evening or this afternoon and walk into this presentation, and I walk in with 10 years of experience behind me, I look at this, I'm like, oh, well, first thing in my head is that they're in a preventative state of maintenance, and they need to stay there. So if I was a management analyst working for the staff, so basically I'm an extension of staff here, what's it take to maintain that? What effort is, in regards to how much money, where to work, how fast we need to work in certain sections of towns, are the questions that run through my head on a daily basis, and that's what we've programmed into your final report. So this is a summary breakdown. There's that 6% of your network is between poor and failed across the board. So that's a very minimal amount of impact to the system, which that tells the managers we can continue potentially to defer those high-cost projects while maintaining the sections that really need to be maintained under a preventative state. Here's a graphical output of that table. Again, I won't get into too much detail, but you look at almost half of the cities in very good condition. You add the excellent slice of the pie, you're approaching that 75% of high level of condition. So a good state to be in. So it's one thing to find out what condition you're in. It's like those questions, the questions we asked up front. What do we have? What condition it is? Now you start asking, well, what ifs? What kind of money do we need to maintain it? That becomes more of a fiscal problem. But before I get into that, I'm kind of jumping ahead. Here's a similar breakdown of your alley network. We were asked to go out and survey all your alleys, both AC and PCC alleys, for condition. Surprisingly, they're in good condition. Weighted average of 71.5. In the agencies I've worked in LA County, you're looking at weighted averages of 20s and 30s for alleys. The stamps from 1915 are still there, have never been touched, and have been removed and replaced up in LA typically. So you have a similar age network here, being over 100 years old, but they're surprisingly in good condition. And there's a mileage breakdown of that. You can see most of the concrete sections for your alleys are in very good condition, where the majority of the AC alleys are in very poor condition. That make up the bulk of that 12% on the bottom right of that table. Again, here's a graphical output of the alley mileage breakdown. If this was an ARC-D or an ARC-E layout, you'd be able to see the PCI colors a little better. This is a graphical output of the conditions, and we can provide you, probably after this session here, a map that's a little bit easier to read. But if you were to look at this is a 0 to 100 scale and a color coding, obviously, of condition. Red being the 0 to 10 scale, and that scale comes from the Army Corps of Engineers. It's a default scale within micropaper. The majority of problems in Newport Beach in regards to bad conditions, those 12% or the 6% that we discussed, are Balboa Island, the far end of Balboa Peninsula, and I believe, I can't remember, up in that area, where a majority of the conditions are, let's say, 50 or below in PCI. And the cities and the staff have looked at that in detail, of how to proactively manage that.
Dave, can you send me a zoomable electronic version of that where you can zero in at a finer level of detail?
Yeah, that's actually available in our intranet currently, and we can send that link over to you guys also. It is currently actually on there already.
Well, okay, send me the link, that's fine. I'm not on the intranet, so, so.
Yeah, we work with the GIS staff. Any information in the pavement management database can be mapped. So any request coming from council or city engineer staff can be mapped out. This is a good comparison of view against other Orange County cities. That question comes up quite a bit. The question came up quite a bit when I was working with OCTA at a county level. The size of your network is important to me. When I compare, you try to benchmark, you compare yourself against Laguna Woods or Villa Park. That's not an equal comparison. You can't do that. You have to look at something that's a coastal community, like Huntington Beach would be a perfect example for you to compare yourself against. Newport, or excuse me, Laguna Beach types, which isn't on here. Fountain Valley might be a good example. But when it comes down to the condition level of Newport Beach, you're above par when it comes to the conditions that we have found. And again, that puts us in a preventative maintenance and a fiscal forecasting kind of operation. And these numbers are coming from 4- or 5-year-old numbers from the OCTA as well as my project experience. All these agencies that we have listed here, I'm the project manager currently for these cities, so I know those networks pretty well. You asked earlier about how long does it take to deteriorate past 90. Again, this is not the scale, but it's an example of an asphalt concrete, AC concrete life cycle. On the left side of the graph, you have the PCI 0 to 100. On the bottom, you have the life of that pavement section. If no maintenance was done over 25 years, the section would last basically 25 to 30 years from get-go to the end, where it's starting to fall apart. Obviously, cities don't operate like that. So cities are in the business of performing slurry seal and preventative maintenance at low cost per square foot, and that's the goal that you should be shooting for, and we reflected that in the report. As sections get down to a level of that 75, 80 PCI, they need to be considered for a slurry seal candidate. Because that blue line indicates as you apply a slurry, it extends the life of that asphalt section. A slurry seal is a simple example because it only extends it 2 years. But if you were to show an overlay here, like let's say it got down to a level of 55 and it was $1.80 per square foot, you overlay that section, it restarts the clock. An overlay PCI is considered a 100, so you're back on the 25-year life cycle again. So that's the business that you're in. You want to be able to approach as many sections as possible at a large amount of square foot early on in the deterioration cycle rather than the latter part of that deterioration because of the cost per square foot. It's that simple. And that statement down below says it all right there. Our firm looked at the unit cost per square foot, worked with Andy and staff to define what practices are being applied. This is a summary table, and there's a little bit more actual activities that can be recommended within the final report and are. But what we're looking at is just a summary table of the unit cost per square foot to do those types of maintenances, because you have to have this information to go into the fiscal planning, obviously, because if we want to know how much budget we have and how much it costs to do any type of maintenance at the square foot level. So next steps, going into a pavement management program, obviously we've done the condition assessment. Now we need to look at fiscal outlay. So remember, PMP is only a planning tool. It's always in flux based on economies of the day, economies of the county, the state, the feds, environment, El Nino cycles potentially next winter. So that's why OCTA has recognized that, other cities recognize that, and you update these pretty much on a 2 to 3 year basis. Other needs to consider is available funding, conflicting city projects like water, sewer, storm drain projects that we looked at those for this project to make sure that our recommendations do not conflict with those on other infrastructure types. Future developments, changes in traffic flow are always monitored. And pavement types, staff's always looking at what types of newer applications, new technologies, such as your artificial turfs. My daughter plays them on them all the time in soccer, and I have my stories, but there's always those new applications that you're looking for on the world of pavement to consider at a low-cost benefit. So anticipated fundings, we looked at an overall picture of the total city funding, combined the arterials and residentials. We looked at about a $3.1 million budget annually to spend on the network. Remember, one of the goals that we were trying to achieve is to maintain, this came from city staff, to maintain the level of condition at 80. Office of the arterials came in at 82. What's it take to maintain that on a revenue basis? With residentials, you're at 72, so what does it take fiscally to reach a level of 80 over a 7-year program? And what we found is there needs to be an additional $750,000 supplemental revenue coming into the program to reach a citywide level of 80 across the board, arterials and residentials. Assumptions that we made under that were no other funding sources available, just dealing with the 1.6 measure M turn back and the 1.5 gas tax. And then funding for replacement of concrete streets and alleys is not included in the program. We were going to talk about that at the latter part of the presentation. So we're strictly just looking at arterials and collectors. This graph has 4 elements in the legend there. The light blue, this is a 1.6 and the 1.5 annual expenditure layout over 7 years. This is the arterial layout that you're looking at. The light blue is the PCI, the light blue column there is the PCI before any maintenance is done, and the PCI, the dark blue is the PCI after. The yellow line is the $1.6 million annually, goes across the board, and the orange or red line is what is called deferred maintenance, of how much debt are we getting rid of, basically is a great way to put deferred maintenance. How much debt are we removing from the arterial network with the $1.6 million budget? It's like paying off a credit card. If I put a little bit more money in, how quickly does my principal go down? So that's how that's a good analogy to use here. So with the $1.6 million across the board on arterials, we found that the PCI maintains itself just above 80 over the 7 years. There's that dark blue line. The deferred maintenance goes quickly down, which is a good sign. It bottoms out roughly about $1.5 million, and then it slightly goes back up, and we can talk about that through the Q&A. But to me as a manager, this is a good sign because it's telling us that there's potential savings there within the arterial 7-year outlay for revenue to push to other networks within the city, be it your alley program AC or alley PCC or your residential program. Similar for the residential, we found that the $1.5 million for residential is not adequate to reach a level of 80 within 7 years. Came up short, came up about to a level of 77 or so. So we obviously our goal was to identify the required funding to reach that 80, and we found it to be that $750,000. So the $2.25 million is what we applied. As you can see, the dark blue line jumps up. Today it's down at 72. The first year of funding is after the maintenance. So that dark blue jumps up to 78 and then maintains it at a level of 80. The good sign as well is that your deferred maintenance is dropping. That's an indicator that you're doing proactive work and you're going to have an easier time managing the network later on. So with that, I want to give it back to Andy, and feel free to ask me any questions after.
Okay, just to recap what we just went over. As Peter just mentioned, our current citywide weighted PCI is 76, which is actually very good. And in order to maintain and keep our PCI at 80 or above, we need to program at least $3.85 million per fiscal year for the next 7 fiscal years. And we also need to maintain a proactive overlay and or reconstruction programs so that we can address all our deferred maintenance issues. And also, we need to continue to inspect our arterials and collectors once every 2 years, and also inspect our residential streets once every 3 years. Keep in mind there, it's important to inspect our arterials and collectors once every 2 years just to maintain our measure of eligibility. And lastly, we need to aggressively pursue local funding grants, such as the recently renewed Measure M2 and any other state and federal funding opportunities out there. And actually, before I turn this back over to Dave, are there any questions that we want to?
Councilman Gardner?
We talked about asphalt, concrete. I know at least in Corona Del Mar, we've replaced almost all the alleys with concrete now. But do we do that on streets anymore? I know it's more expensive, it may last longer, but it's harder to maintain, isn't it? I mean, I'm thinking of Ocean Boulevard, which looks pretty awful with all the little tar things we have in there and everything. So you can't just do a slurry seal on concrete the way you can on asphalt. Is there something that you can do to improve it?
No, on concrete streets, you're not going to slurry seal. It's just the wrong application for what we have. And Ocean Boulevard does actually top one of our lists on the what to reconstruct next as far as PCC is concerned. However, I do understand there might be other plans for Ocean Boulevard. That's one of the reasons why we actually pushed it out 1 year. But there isn't any preventative maintenance other than crack sealing those black tar marks that you see out there, which may or may not be the best thing actually for concrete anyways.
So do we do any new concrete streets?
Yes.
Or just alleys?
No, we actually we actually reconstruct certain concrete streets. For instance, we have one Balboa Peninsula or Balboa Village actually from Medina to Island. For the most part, we follow a lot of the assessment districts, which just tends to happen to be in the alleys, but we do reconstruct PCC streets also.
If I could just take a minute, because we're kind of on concrete streets, and I was going to give you maybe there's some questions there later. As you can see, we have a huge pavement system out there, and it takes a lot of effort to keep track of this. And one of the unique things, and actually it's very fortunate to come to Newport Beach, because coming from Huntington Beach, I was really behind the curve there. Our streets were really back. Council had years and years ago in the 70s deferred maintenance. In fact, they hadn't slurried their streets when I got there in 20 years. First thing we did was got a slurry program going. But we're well ahead of the curve here on the maintenance side, so that's a good news item. Concrete streets is another very beneficial thing that's really saved the system. You have quite a lot of concrete streets, particularly on Balboa Island and on the peninsula, and it's a lot of your residential streets. And if you look on the poor side on the tables, the residential, that's where a lot of it is, the old concrete that was built in the 20s and 30s. But it's lasted a long time, and most of its downfalls, if you look at it, came from joining and things like that. Back then, they used to pour 20, 30, 40-foot panels, and they wouldn't join it. So if you look at it now, it has all these traverse cracks and things that we're trying to seal. Island Avenue is a great example of that. Nowadays, they join on 10-foot, 12-foot spacings, and it tends to hold a lot better. So looking at the pavement program overall, as you've heard from Peter and Andy, we put about $3.7 million into our pavement system a year, and that's basically going into the asphalt program. There's nothing going into the alleys. There's nothing going into the concrete program. And what I'd be proposing and looking at this is we took a look at a snapshot of Balboa Island and said, how are we going to address this concrete program? So what we did is we did a quick little snapshot of the whole island, looked at it and said, if we went on a 45-year program with 4% inflation, if we overlaid everything, and there's a policy question in itself, do we go from concrete to an asphalt look? And I hear there's people that want to keep concrete out there. If we overlaid the alley and we went on a 45-year cycle of maintenance, we'd be looking at $327,000 annually to overlay the concrete streets, basically. If we went into replacement mode where we started replacing those streets, it would average out to $235,000 a year for the next 45 years. Now, again, the nice factor about concrete out there is that it actually has a longer lifespan than 45 years. We estimated probably 80 years. So you've doubled your life for the same cost.
It also isn't black.
It's not black.
So you don't have as much of the heat island effect, which is an advantage.
Yes, and that's part of the lead side. In fact, on Oasis, you remember, we got a great bid for a concrete parking lot. It really cuts down on the heat around the buildings and adds some effects there. The neat thing, too, when they built the city is a lot of your islands like Balboa are sand, and sand's a great base for concrete. You put water on it, you get compaction, and it sits there. Along with all the moisture and salt you get on the lower levels of the peninsula and Balboa Island, the concrete holds up much better than the asphalt. The asphalt tends to have water issues over time, like you see around the medians where they're irrigated, around the curves, it starts raveling. So concrete's a good item for that. And also concrete is, because our flat cities on Balboa and the peninsula is very flat, the streets, the concrete's able to take that drainage a little better. So in looking at the two, we thought, well, it probably makes sense to go back to concrete on these areas. Again, the problem is it's a very disruptive process. To take out that street and put a new street in is not a simple process, but it's a one-time thing. You have some pain, and then it goes for another 80 years. So what we'd be looking at basically is, and here's a little map of Balboa, and you'll see it on the exhibit. Make sure you get that connection. You see a lot of the red and the lighter colors there are the aging streets on that. And it was a good example that probably needs to be addressed and start working on. The next level, if we do go that route, though, is obviously funding. So what we'd be looking for if we were to start a concrete street replacement program, along with keeping up our asphalt network, we have to find the funding for that. And what I would think is we want to start with $1 or $1.5 million a year. And again, this is a tough time to talk about this because we used to do about $5 million in the CIP. Now we're down to $3 million. I don't know what the projections for the next couple of years are, but should that revenue stream return, we'd probably want to start diverting at least, say, $1 million, $1.5 million into those streets. And what I'd propose is probably start with the worst PCI ratings and move up from there. Look for streets with a higher traffic volumes. Maybe Balboa would be a good example or something like that to start off with. Also look for areas where we're going to combine that with other projects. I know we will hear in the next master plan we have a large water main we want to put down on Balboa Island, and we're looking to move that out in a couple years. So maybe when that's done, we also do the pavement at that time. And then focus on those PCI rating, those low streets. Again, you also notice if you look at the ratings that the concrete ratings are low, but if the streets aren't failed, they're actually very solid out there. I was out at Island Avenue, and we're going to be doing that this year. A lot of spider cracks, but it's drivable. We've got a lot of black tar mastic in there, which really sets them off. I think if we went to a gray epoxy type, it wouldn't be so apparent. So I think if we can work with General Service, it's more expensive, but it's probably well off in the long run because you guys hear all kinds of complaints related to black mastic. So that would be on the concrete streets. The other area is the alleys, and it's really nice to come in the city with a good alley system. We do have a set of alleys, as you saw, that are on the lower side, the poor, and most of those are our asphalt alleys. They're wearing out. They're probably not worth trying to go in and rebuild those alleys with asphalt. It might make sense to come with concrete. And actually, as we've been doing assessment districts, and we have a new one coming up with 103 on the peninsula, we're going to be going in and replacing the asphalt alleys with concrete. And they've held up and served the city really well. So what I'd also like to do is if the revenue returns at some point, we could start putting about $500,000 into that. And every couple of years, tackle a few of those major alleys, particularly Santa Ana Heights, Newport Heights, that has some of those older alleys, and take that out. That's kind of our recommendation and our pavement management plan wrap-up, and we'd be happy to address questions on that.
Councilman Daigle?
Is slurry part of this as well? Doing slurry, is that kind of part of helping the index?
Yes, it is. Actually, what we propose, we would try to get to every street at least once every 7 years. That's part of our program, and slurry is an integral part of that. The residential program, we slurry our streets, and that really extends the life out on them.
Because in anticipation of the benchmarking item, this evening I was going through the database and looking at how we're doing in certain areas. And I was noticing with the slurry, it indicated that we had done the work under budget, substantially under budget. But the measure that it was using was the estimate of how much slurry was, and then it compared that estimate to the bid. Does that make sense?
I'm not 100% following that, but we have been getting good bids in slurry if that's...
Okay. My question is, instead of leaving money on the table, is there a way to do those bids so that there's an initial cost and then there's a charge per mile, so that way we fully utilize our budget each year for slurry?
I think we can. Actually, if you look back at this year's slurry program, and you can help me if I'm wrong on this, Andy, but we actually got a very good bid on slurry and realized that and came to council with the award, and we asked for an extra 15%, and we pushed that all the way into that budget to try to capture more what we had. Was our 50?
Yeah, let me, see, actually, everything I got there. The only thing with slurry contracts is usually we're dealing with about 4 million square feet of it. So if you get a bid that is 10 cents versus 12 cents, there's a huge savings already just right off the 2 cents. So when we were doing the estimates for this past slurry job, we were estimating about 12 cents, and it came in at 9 cents, and therefore we saw huge savings on your end.
Okay, right. My point is there's kind of an exchange going on. People pay their taxes, and in exchange for that, they get improvements. So if we can't deliver on those improvements, we need to deliver on utilizing that money, is my point. So that's why I'm asking, is there a way to reorganize the bid so that we fully utilize our budget and get as many improvements in place as possible? Because I know, for example, in my district, people want areas slurried, and I was told, well, we can't do it till next year.
Yeah, no, we don't cut back on the area that we're actually slurry sealing. We have a 7-year cycle where we're going to cover every area within the 7-year period. Now, depending on how the bids come in, that's the only time we have the savings is when the bids come in low. Not to say that we de-scope just to save the money, I guess.
What happens to that money that is saved then, that when the bid comes in low?
If it came in low and we covered all the area, it'd be rolling into next year's plan. Remember, a slurry is a seal program, and we want to do it every 7 years as a policy, no more than 8. But you don't want to just slurry a street because we have additional money. Let's say we just did it 3 years ago. you actually cause problems on that. The slurry can actually break off and cause road and reliability things. And cost effectiveness, it probably doesn't make a sense. Slurry doesn't add structural strength to the pavement, it just adds a seal. So.
But there are some roads off of Vista del Oro, I assure you, will not erode from too much slurry. I mean, they're really pretty broken down. Not the ones that I'm referring, some of them are, you're right. But the ones I'm referring to, I discussed with Steve. He said that we can do them next year. But what I'm suggesting, if there was funds available this year, why not roll more improvements in and spend the money?
We could look at that, sure. If you could point those out, and we can look at our plan with that. One other consideration on that, overlay also plays into residential streets. And there are streets, I know actually we skipped this year slurry because they're up for overlay. Dover Drive was an example. We slurried that area but one street, and they called in, why aren't we getting slurry? We're actually overlaying the street because it needs more than slurry. And coming up, I'm thinking, our arterial system's pretty well off. We might want to move more money into our residential system. It's on the lower side for two reasons, to catch that up, and our arterials are almost to the point that I'm going to have a hard time competing for OCTA grants against other cities because they're in much worse shape. And it is about traffic and pavement index. So we might want to let them deteriorate a little while we're working on a residential overlays. I mean, that's an interesting thought, but truthfully, but it's strategically, so when they come out with a call for a couple of years, we can actually bag 50% money. So I hope I answered that
Councilman
Hen? Yeah, well, I guess for my money, if there's money left over from the slurry seal program, I'd like to see it go into the Portland cement program, which we don't have a program for presently, if I understand your comments correctly. And, you know, this Portland cement thing is, unfortunately, it plays to the older areas of the cities where people have a pervasive feeling that they get shortchanged on the city's reconstruction program. And I understand that there's lots of reasons that play into that, but we need a Portland cement program, and we need it for the older areas of the city. And we need to be moving forward on it. And so I'm very much in favor of moving money to the extent we can into the residential end of it and starting a program on the Portland cement now instead of some future date when maybe it will restore funding at a higher level. So why can't we start that now? I mean, to exclude Portland cement from this whole analysis and then come at the end and say, well, you know, we really ought to do something about Portland cement. It's a street like any other street. It should be included in our program, in our regular maintenance. And I'm not very happy with a 45-year plan to do that. So how would you respond to all of that, Dave?
Well, and you make a good point. I don't think historically we've put a lot of money into concrete, and I could be wrong. I've been here a year and a half. But because the concrete ages so slowly, it's probably one of those areas that we've allowed to lapse. We have some poor streets, but they're still serviceable. Asphalt ages so quick, and we've had enough money, just enough to keep that system going. That's where it's gone. Your point about taking excess slurry money, we could set that up. Currently, right now, in fact, this year, slurry is under the general fund. That's one of the areas we have $750,000. That kind of goes to another thing, that what happens when the project comes under budget, what happens to those funds? Well, those funds roll right back into the general fund for reprogramming the following year. With council's direction, if we set up some kind of concrete fund, then that money could be, or any money that we find left over from projects could be moved at your discretion into something like that. That's how you could start a concrete program. The other way is if we do get back to where we're programming $5 million or so a year to capital, it'd be something where we just say, okay, we want to get at least this much into that program and start marching down that road.
Well, I would like to start with a plan for the Portland cement streets. Let's start with a plan. What should our plan be? Should it be a 45-year replacement cycle or a 25-year or whatever?
And 85-year. That's more realistic.
I'm talking about to bring the current poor condition back up to a reasonable level, because you said before, it's the pavement's condition index, the worst performing streets right now today in that pavement condition index are in the older areas, Balboa Island, Balboa Peninsula, which are more prevalent Portland cement. So let's bring our overall index up by working on those streets too, not treat them as an afterthought in our pavement management program.
And we'd be happy to do that. Truly, it's a funding question on right now where there's not enough funds to go through everything. If we take it off asphalt and put it on concrete, concrete's very expensive up front, versus an asphalt overlay, but longevity benefit cost pays you back. And I understand that.
I understand that, but then that thought process just leads to continued deferral of dealing with that. If we don't have a program at all, it's easy to just continue to defer it. So if I'm overstating anything, you should tell me I am. I mean, I want to make sure we're dealing with facts here, but it's kind of astounding that we don't have a Portland cement program.
You aren't overstating. Actually, last year was the first year before we cut the budget. We actually put $1 million in. I think it was the 08, 09. Steve and I talked about it with Homer, and we actually started that, and that's when we had our $5 million allotment. Last year, when we cut it down to $3 million, with all the given needs, that didn't get refunded as a Portland concrete program. So that's how we're doing Island Avenue this year. We still have that $1 million, and we're going to do that. But we need a continual funding source of that to make any headway. You get 3.5 in gas tax and Measure M, 3.81. That won't even keep your asphalt trying to get up to your benchmark level. It'll start deteriorating. That's why we said we need about another $750,000 just to get that program to keep the asphalt at the benchmark area of 80. We're going to need to supplement that with some other regular fund, and that's why I said I suggest about $1 million, $1.5 million a year. The other thing is, what does that offer? Balboa Island, for instance, there's two streets, I think, on the Little Island, Crystal, and another street.
Abalone.
We looked at those two, and it's about $400,000 just to do those two small segments. So if we put $1.5 million in there, we're probably looking at about 6 or 8 segments a year. It's going to take a while to march across that island unless we come up with a lot more funding.
Okay.
Well, that's why I think that, excuse me, Councilman Henn, but that's why I think that maybe you ought to be looking at some kind of a hybrid approach here, because no matter how you cut it, it's going to be very expensive to replace all these concrete streets. And in my discussions with you guys, if I understand it correctly, a lot of the streets that have these concrete paving sections are still structurally sound and serviceable because the majority of the cracking is a horizontal cracking versus a vertical cracking.
Right.
And so we've filled them in with all these black tar strips. I know from talking to my constituents on Balboa Island, I think their major issue is an aesthetic issue. So if we could come up with a program to replace a lot of these black tar strips with the gray mastic you were talking about, as well as continuing on with the replacement program, that you might achieve a better success rate at improving the overall situation as opposed to trying to do it over 45 years.
And that's very true. We actually had talked in the shop about, you've probably seen on the 405 and some of the roofs, they have what they call diamond grinding now, and you can actually plane off concrete. You'll get an exposed aggregate, but it takes the roughness right off and makes it smooth. And if you maybe did some minor patching and then different compounds, we could start a program like that on some of the streets that aren't too far gone, basically to keep another 10, 15 years while we're working on the real bad ones.
Look, I understand that, and we've got lots of alternatives, and I'm hoping we can identify ways to save money on the concrete. My fundamental point is our pavement management program should have an inherent component associated with the Portland cement streets. It shouldn't be ignored. It needs to be integrated into our pavement management program as an ongoing item that is addressed.
Understand.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask you a quick question? And we probably need to move along pretty quickly, and that is, what happens when the state cuts our gas tax money, like I think they have?
Well, there is that proposal on the table, and when that happens, we'll have to go back to our current CIP, a large portion of it funded with gas tax. We'll have to either take that component out or reshuffle it, look at maybe something on the lower priority that we can defer. Either that or we backfill it, subsidize it with some general fund revenue or some other source. The only one I can think of is general fund it now. Prop 1B's currently going to be allowed through. Prop 42's frozen. Gas tax is being talked about taken. So we have some serious challenges there. We'll have to just reshuffle the deck, I guess.
Do you have something, Councilman Kern?
Just real quick, I just wanted to confirm that Harborview Hills South is scheduled for this year's program. I think that was our understanding last time when we looked at
the slurry seal portion or the overlay portion?
Well, whatever it's due for, I think it's due this year. Is that right, Steve?
Yes, that's the slurry seal. You're going to encounter some of the streets not being slurry sealed because they are beyond the slurry seal mark. So when we do get the calls, which I actually have been already, we do tell them that it's scheduled for an overlay the following year. The streets that we are skipping this year
Are going to be done next year.
Yes, as an overlay. This year, we're only doing the slurry. So.
Councilman Webb?
I'd like to compliment the staff on an excellent program, and it's, I really appreciated a second-generation engineer telling us about the pavement management program, and that his father, I think actually he may have gotten started while his father was working for the city of Newport. So at any rate, it's good to see that we are putting together a comprehensive program, and I think that we have our challenges with money, but it's better for us to do this than to do what Costa Mesa has done and just watch it deteriorate. Okay.
I also think it'd be nice to discuss this more during our strategic planning in January, because I think there are a lot of decisions we need to make.
Yeah, very good comment. Okay, thank you, Dave,
Thank you.
Andy. Good presentation. And as Councilman Webb said, it's a good report. Anyone from the public want to comment on the pavement management program? Okay, seeing no one, Mr. Bludow, we'll move on to the last one, which is the water master plan.
Thank you. And Mike Sinacori is going to run us through briefly this PowerPoint, I think you have, Mike, don't you?
Briefly. Go ahead. Mayor, member of councils, thank you for having us here tonight on this PowerPoint as well. I'm going to hit the lights, Councilmember Henn, please. Thank you. I'm going to zip through some of these slides. You have a copy of this presentation in front of you, and I'm going to pass this to Mr. Badum. One of the slides was very poor to read as I looked at the PowerPoint. In the interest of time, I'm just going to zip through some of this. This is some of the pictures from the early 20s. This particular line was laid in 1923 across the bay. It's right above the Coast Highway. I believe those are some city employees that actually were putting this line in. And this line, 24-inch line, was replaced in 1986.
Is that Don Webb down there?
I was waiting for that. That is correct. And like Don, I like the history. I'd love to go into it in more detail. I sense pages of the past program coming up here in the near future with Mr. Murdoch leading the charge there. The far right actually is a shot of the guys from the 50s. The guy on the backhoe, for those that you know, Gil Gomez, that's him on the backhoe. He started here in 47 and retired in 89 after 42 years. And he actually And Gil Gomez Jr. is actually working for the same group that's replacing Maines back there in the 50s. He was in my office today and stopped by to chat, and just interesting to hear the stories. So, but in the interest of time, I'll zip forward. Big Canyon Reservoir, if you look at the whole piece of equipment on the left, this is from the first couple days of grading of the Big Canyon Reservoir when we brought that reservoir online, 200 million gallon reservoir, one of the biggest in Southern California. Picture on the right is the finished product. And look at what's around that area. There's absolutely nothing there. So the engineers and utilities operators of the early days really thought through what they needed to allow the developments to take place. Again, in the interest of time, we have a pretty complicated system. The exhibit I just passed out to you sort of shows that. There's several pressure zones. There's subzones. It's a lot of pumps, a lot of pressure-reducing stations. It's got a groundwater project that brings in water 10 miles away. It's an older system as well. It dates back to those lines that I showed you in the 20s. I could go into a lot of detail, but again, it's getting close to 5. In 1995 or so, we started thinking about doing a comprehensive master plan. You know, the groundwater project, we lost our wells in the late 50s as we were bringing in the MET system. And I think right afterwards, I think the engineers and the city councils at the time started thinking we need to get that secondary supply back and started working towards that. So in 97, that came online. But once that came online, we started thinking, well, what do we need to do next to keep this system strong and reliable for the community? And that's where we came up with the 99 master plan. And needing to look at sufficient groundwater facilities, imported water sources, how the system's laid out. Is it working? You know, there's a lot of thought in the system in the early days, but they didn't have hydraulic models. They didn't have hydraulic computer models that simulated how the system works. We had a lot of great operators that really did their job well, but we didn't have that modeled. So part of the master plan, we developed a computer model, calibrated it, checked it with the operators to make sure it worked, and we were able to test the system to make sure that we were actually delivering the water the way we needed to. And we're planning through 2020. That's key, because as we were laying out the master plan, I'll skip a couple of these slides. We have the fire marshal in the audience here today. Part of the master planning effort is to make sure we have the supply and the fire protection to all the communities in town. Make sure we have enough fire protection in case a catastrophic event happens like we're seeing up in L.A. We haven't had one of those events here, but I think we are ready. We're as ready as we can be. I think we can be a little better, and I think the master plan identified a few things that we have since done since '99. The '99 master plan itself, what we did back in '99 is we developed, and I'm going to point you to your report if I need to trouble you with the report, but the first pullout in the report is actually the master plan. It shows every cost, every project for the 20 years we identified for that 1999 master plan, and the table on the page before actually shows the dollars associated with that $50 million plan. We have categories A down through J that looked at all sorts of different projects. And in 10 years, we've accomplished quite a bit of the projects we laid out in '99. We completed about $3.3 million a year in projects. All but one transmission main identified in '99 has since been installed. We've got a new secondary supply up to the airport up Irvine Avenue. That's done in several different phases. We've done some work on Jamboree Road. We've really strengthened our transmission main. All but one's been done. We'll talk about that one project. The computer model I mentioned did some analysis. We identified some hydraulic improvements that were necessary through the system, and every one of those identified hydraulic deficiencies has been corrected. We've done some major pressure reducing stations. The utility staff themselves, actually, just like those old guys in the 50s, they've done a bunch of pressure reducing station work on all those subzones that I showed you on the map. They've gone in and done improvements on their own and got those, all the ones identified on the master plan corrected, I think, at this point. Maybe there's a few left, but not many. We've also got the Big Canyon Reservoir covered, a bunch of maintenance and repair projects. But the area where we sort of digressed from the '99 master plan is the pipeline replacements. The cast iron pipelines, we came up with about 50 years of projects in '99. And as we started those replacement programs, we ran into some issues with other projects, the assessment districts. Balboa Village came along. We needed to replace some pipelines in Balboa Village. The assessment areas actually slowed us down a bit, so we were able to divert the funds to get things like Balboa Village down and some of the other assessment district funds. We also did, if the council members recall, we had a major failure out on Dover Drive where that project alone cost us, I believe, George, what, $400,000 in repairs alone, just the repairs of that main, and then about $800,000 in improvements to fix the road and put it back together. We also advanced a project that wasn't even in a 20-year horizon. It was a year 23 project, our industrial way project up by the the General Services Yard. With that failure on Coast Highway, Dover, we started really scratching our heads going, wow, if we had a catastrophic failure of the line near the General Services Yard, probably would have happened during an earthquake event, we would really not want to be flooding out the General Services Yard right when we really need that General Services Yard. I don't know if council read the paper today or saw it in the news. We had a catastrophic failure up in Studio City on Saturday. 62-inch main, 95-year-old main broke up in Studio City, and there's going to be people out of their homes for about a month. And this is the same sort of thing we're looking at here in Newport, is to make sure this kind of stuff doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen very often, or we're at least addressing the biggest risks the soonest in our master planning. With all the adjustments that have taken place since '99, we went ahead and contracted with Civil Tech to actually evaluate all the pipelines that we need to do from here out. It was a 50-year plan. We only funded 20 years of the program. We now have looked at every project all the way through, every project we need to replace throughout the entire town. We also updated our hydraulic model, and we made some adjustments. Pages, the last pullouts, I'm not going to bore you with all of them. We've come up with now an $88 million plan over 30 years to actually replace all the older pipelines, the ones that were identified back in '99, but these are pipelines that date back to the 1920s. The very first picture I showed you was a line that was built in 1923. That extends all the way down Coast Highway from the Coast Highway Bridge all the way over to Goldenrod. It's 1923. Is it going to break anytime soon? I don't know, but it's going to break at some point. And we should probably try to replace it before it does. And we have other lines like that through the heights. We also included in this update some major replacement costs. We are going to need to replace the Big Canyon cover at some point in the next 15, 20 years. That's a significant expenditure. Our wells might need some work. And we brought that well water back in 97. That saves us a significant amount of money in terms of our water supply. We want to keep that going. And I think I did the math roughly. I think we've saved $30 million in water supply costs by having that system in place since 97. I'll let George speak more of that tonight when he's talking about the rates. The next steps, we do have a plan. It's 3 pages here in your report. The next 10 years, it shows $3.5 million worth of work. The latter 20 years, it's a little more work, but we're trying to focus on what really we need to do right this next 10 years. And we have some assessment district projects that are coming up. 103 Peninsula Point just was awarded, or is being awarded tonight. We have AD 100, which is in central Balboa. That we expect to go forward as well. Balboa Island, we also have some mains out there. We just talked about pavement management. Some of those streets that are going to be replaced out in Balboa Island, we also have some water mains that might need to go in at the same time. So we need to make sure we have the funding available for that. That Coast Highway transmission main we spoke about, at some point in time, we are going to need to do that. And that one, since it's so old, we've brought that forward here. It used to be further out in the plan. We said, that could be catastrophic. If we lose one of these pipelines on the highway, we could shut the highway down for a significant amount of time. There's a crossing at Goldenrod. Ed Burt, who's sitting in the audience, he mentions that line to me all the time, and he's nervous about that line, and that's 1926 vintage. We'd like to get that one out of there, too, during this next 10 years.
Mike, quick question. This
Yes,
Coast Highway transmission main, I presume that would involve major tearing up of Coast Highway to do that project.
If it was 10 years ago, Councilmember Hen, I would say yes. However, there's some new technology coming out. We've done some little bit of research on it right now. We're doing a bay crossing study right now because laying a new main across the bay has some regulatory issues. We're hoping we can come up with a program that might be able to structurally line inside those pipes on the highway and be less intrusive to the community.
Because we're talking about relinquishment of Coast Highway. It was just paved.
Exactly. And there's also a line up in the Heights which has got the same vintage that was all built in the Roaring Twenties. Those lines, I have some pictures of the insides of those lines when we finish the Industrial Way project. It makes me a little nervous. At some point, we need to look at those lines. Again, in the interest of time and getting to council members' questions, we've done a $3.5 million, spent $3.3 million over the last 10 years. If Balboa Island would have gone, the assessment district would have gone, we would have actually hit the $3.5 million mark for the last 10 years. That's quite a bit of work, and we're pretty proud that we've gotten all that done. We're per year in expenditures. I'm sorry, $3.5 million. $3.5 million per year. We're recommending about the same level of program for the next 10 years and see how things are going. We might come up with some technology that will be less expensive than open cut construction across the Coast Highway. We also are recommending a separate fund so we can put the funding aside so we can maintain these programs. We're also thinking that we need to relook at this in 5 years to see if we've got the right level of funding or if there's other changes we need to make or something else pops up. There are a couple projects that popped up in the last 10 years that Homer might recall. You got a couple phone calls from the Sea Island community, and it was a 1980 ductile iron pipe that broke every couple months, it seemed like, and it was recommended to move that project into the mix. That's a 1980 pipe. We might find some other newer pipelines that need replacement now. It might pop up. We had the same situation up on Jamboree Road, 1976 pipe that needed to be replaced. But we also think we can largely do this program through cash funding and not do any bonding. Back in 57, when they bonded for the reservoir, they had $1.8 million bond voted by the people. I think people back then really wanted the water supply, wanted the strong, reliable system. And I'll give you one, as I go back in history, Don, I'm sorry, I don't want to speak for you. In 1915, there were 15 houses in Corona del Mar. In 1923, when the citywide vote to annex Corona del Mar, one of the major issues was water supply. They couldn't deliver enough water to Corona del Mar, and that's what I think started all the pipelines in the 20s. I think we need to continue looking at our system, making it strong for the community to continue thriving. And with that, I'll take any questions. Dave or Steve have any
Questions?
answers?
I have one. We're going to be paying off, I think, the water bonds for the groundwater system pretty soon, so I presume that's going to free up some cash flow that we're spending every year that could go into this program?
It's this year, and that is factored into, I believe, George's presentation this evening. That's into the program.
And we've made that payment already this fiscal year, so it is paid off.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Councilman Curry?
Yeah. Do we coordinate these improvements with our road improvement program so that we're not constantly tearing up the same streets? I know MacArthur, for the better part of the mid-'90s, was under construction.
Absolutely. My father-in-law lives in Big Canyon, and he constantly gives me a hard time about seeing cones up and tearing the roads up, and then we come back and do it again. And we really try not to do that. And with the assessment districts is a perfect example of where we stopped projects. We could have gone in and replaced Peninsula Point by now. It was due as year 4 in the 1999 plan. Knowing it was coming, we said, well, let's wait. And we'll wait till that district comes forward, and then we can leverage, as Director Badham tells me, we want to leverage those funds, try to get as much bang for our buck and not tear up the street twice. You tear up the street twice, put it back once, that costs money. Put it back a second time, that costs money. You do it once, and it saves everybody money. It saves those residents money in the point.
Yeah, our standard procedure is, just we maintain all these master plans, the water, the sewer, the pavement master plan, and we overlay them and see where they work together. And, as you can see in the assessment districts, we've often been able to leverage the fact that we need to do a sewer line, a water line, and the underground at the same time, and then all three of those funds share the costs, so and it's a savings to each one. So we do that as much as we can.
Okay. Any other comments?
Mr. Mayor, if I just may close in saying that the reason this is coming to you this evening is because we have our water rate issue that will be coming before you, and whether we send out the notice to the residents. So the staff had to back up quite a bit. Since this is a component of the water rate, we needed to back up in order to have this study so that we would know exactly the numbers that we needed in order to establish the rate. So what you just heard Mike give in a very brief 15-minute presentation probably started, a year ago as far as our thinking was concerned.
Well, I think the staff deserves a lot of compliments for just maintaining our underground system and maintaining the streets. There's present guys, past guys. Because, a lot of the cities around don't take care of that stuff. They like the PCI index, they let the stuff deteriorate. In the long run, it costs them more. And I think it's commendable that the city's taken the approaches with the master plans and all the programs we have to examine and keep this infrastructure in good condition, because the alternative is much more expensive.
It is.
And it all does start with good planning, and so there's been a tremendous amount of planning here discussed this afternoon, so I agree.
Absolutely. Between the pavement management and this, a heck of a lot of work, good work that's gone into it.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody from the public want to comment on this? Okay, seeing no one, are there any public comments on non-agenda items? Seeing none, we're adjourned to closed session.